here. I can see not just students in our class, but also a number of colleagues and friends who operate in our sister and brotherly networks in London. Welcome all of you. I think I have to make this very brief because we are running short of time. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's presentation by Dr. Abdel-Fatau Musah, who I have finally brought. And Dr. Fatau Musah is going to talk to us about regional norms, leadership, and security crisis in Africa. Obviously, as presented on the board, Dr. Musah is the director, the deputy head of the office and director of political affairs at the United Nations Office for African Union. He's currently based in Addis Ababa, and obviously Dr. Musah needs no introduction for people who have been studying peace and security, mainly because he spent a very long time at ECOWAS, doing many of the things that he's currently doing. And he's an extremely well-known and well-published academic in the area of peace and security. And most importantly, at least for me, he's also the chair of the board of the African Leadership Center, the board of trustees. There are many colleagues here who would of course have heard about Musah but have not met him. So it's really my pleasure to invite Dr. Musah to speak to us, and then we will have a brief Q&A at the end of the session.
Yeah.
Musah, please.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, thank you very much, Godwin, and good evening. Nice to, meet you today. Me and Godwin rolled me into this. But it's a real pleasure, meeting you. Today's leaders for Africa. I think there is a major issue with our so-called political leaders today. If you do content analysis of the speeches and the pronouncements of our leaders, you see that out of every speech, they only talk in the future. That we have to make things well for the future. The people we are meeting are the leaders of tomorrow. We have to prepare them for tomorrow. So we often have leaders, before they even become, president in Africa, they are in the age brackets of 70, 80, and, above. Whereas if you look at the entire world, the age bracket is rather coming down, even for leaders of countries. Yeah, I think you all know at what age people like Barack Obama became president, then Cameron and others, and then you go to, Africa, it is the direct opposite. Because we are used to this concept of what is the leaders of tomorrow, instead of talking of today. So I address you as, what is it, the drivers of change in Africa today. Drivers of change, and not waiting for the future before, you can, say that, okay, this is a training period. No. In fact, if you look at, the entire world, the best leaders have always been activists right from where they have been. Whether student leaders, in whichever corner that you are. That is actually what, I understand by leadership. That leadership is just not the president, it's not the prime minister, it's not the CEO of a company or anything like that. But at any particular point in time, if you can transform reality, transform reality, not interpret reality. In fact, that is the big difference between leaders and great leaders. A leader, you can interpret reality in whatever form. I think it was Karl Marx who said that some time back. Yeah, that philosophers have always, interpreted reality in various ways. But what is required is to transform that reality. You know, that's a transforming it positively. You know, so those who serve as agents of that transformation are, you know, what is it, the transformational leaders that we are talking about. You see, you can have inspirational leaders. An inspirational leader, you know, is somebody, oh, you know, you've heard, you know, his pronouncement, and really, you know, what he's saying makes a lot of sense, because he's talking about our condition, he's talking about this, he's doing that. That is real, you know, he inspires me. If you take the US civil rights movement, maybe Martin Luther King was a very great inspirational leader, you know, but Malcolm X was, you know, probably a transformational leader. If you just take it in that, you know, very narrow, you know, sense. Those who inspire are not necessarily those who galvanize, you know, people. That is the difference between inspirational leadership and the transformational, you know, leaders. And the transformational leaders have got both the inspiration and the galvanizing element in them. You know, that is, they tell you of your condition, and then also, you know, so, you know, sort of serve as a facilitator in you, in your efforts to transform it. Me, I feel this is where leadership, you know, should be, you know, situated at, particularly on the situation, you know, regarding the situation in Africa today. If you look at it, you know, very critically, the whole, what is it, peace and security crisis on our continent today can be reduced to probably one major source of our peace and security crisis. There is one, and then there are also two dimensions today to the peace and security environment in, you know, in Africa. If you are talking about the situation of peace and security and why we have it, it is because there is a lack of governance, good governance, which is very much also tied to leadership, And then once there is that bad governance, you know, because power in Africa is the only source, you know, today of patronage. It is the only source, you know, for control of resources, for control of people's minds. You see, in Africa, people go into politics to become rich. In other places, people go into politics when they have become rich, and then to try to transform, you know, that society so that they can leave a legacy. You know, so politics in Africa has become a commercial enterprise, and then the whole business of government becomes a racket. You know, a racket, just like you have drug dealers, you know, and then, you know, others. So the one who controls the racket doesn't want it to change if there are challenges in it, because there are other people. If you have gangsters, there can be a leader, but there are also regional leaders who also control that racket. And each of those leaders also have got their own personal ambitions. You know, so power becomes a zero-sum game. Nobody is allowed, you know, inside it. And I think that is a very critical element, you know, which is something like a major recurrent source of the crisis that we have in Africa today. We just want to reduce it just to, you know, one, people can tell you about drug trafficking, they can tell you about terrorism, they can tell you about climate change, they can tell you about that. But you see, where you have the proper governance framework, it is very possible to handle all those. What you are talking about is just, they are symptoms. They are symptoms of if you are talking about Africa, what power entails. How many times haven't we seen in Africa where people who do not want to lose the racket wheel out 90-year-old people in wheelchairs, to go, they vote for them, they are the president, but the racket is the one that is operating. We saw it in Guinea with Conte, and then not very long ago we saw it in Nigeria, for example. So these are some of the examples. Power is, the beginning and the end. In Africa, if you lose power, you are nobody. That is the situation. If you lose power in Africa, you are nobody. And that is why the two sources of conflict, today, the main dynamics of conflict in Africa linked to clinging on to power, are, what can we say? One of them is the shadow state. The shadow state. And I'm going to interpret it in the simplest way possible. All along since independence, there have been ungoverned spaces in Africa, even within the urban centers, in the capitals, everywhere, there are ungoverned spaces. Those ungoverned spaces are occupied by the huge informal sector. The informal sector who have lost any hope, that the government is going to be the facilitator of at least basic, the provision of public goods. Public goods in the form of infrastructure, basic infrastructure, in the form of facilities in order to allow the population to express themselves, to bring out their creativity, in order to take care of themselves. That infrastructure, put together is the public goods, and then it has always been absent. So many in Africa, today have learned to live by themselves. Nobody cares about the government. What the government does, they are outside the formal sector. And that is why when you see UNDP figures, and then you look at the African countries, and they are all at the bottom of the league, the basic conclusion you come to is that, these countries are just going to collapse. But they don't collapse. They don't collapse. Why? Because those UNDP figures and a lot more are so elitist, they are so technical, they fail to capture what we call the informal sector. They just rely on government figures, whereas the vast majority of the population actually lives outside those figures that are captured in the UNDP indices and what have you. And so this is the situation. So the extent to which we have extended family systems in Africa, where one person can look after probably 60 people in the family, is our social welfare system, which is completely outside the formal sector in Africa. And so whoever is at the head of even that family is a hero in that community, or in that in that family setting, the extended family. Corruption now becomes acceptable, because as long as that person who controls that extended family can bring resources to that family, it is fine. And then where even they call some people armed robbers, there are some pen robbers in Africa. If you are even caught within your community, you are considered a hero just because you take care of people down there. So the notion of corruption within that system is very different from the whole notion of accountability. That informal sector is the one that has traced our illicit routes throughout the continent. the illicit routes, where when you have two countries and then sugar in one country costs 20p, and then in the next country it costs probably a quid, then people would move the goods from where it costs 20 p to the other. It's not completely legal. It's trade within the informal sector, smuggling in our country, our countries, in our region. That's what has happened all along, and there have been rules for this. Human trafficking became part of it, to move people from one place of less opportunities to the other. And if you trace today the entire terrorism routes where they operate, in fact they are tracing the informal trade. It is the illicit trade routes and other things that have now become the routes also for transnational organized crime. That is at the highest form. So when I talk about the shadow state, it is not the state of corruption or anything like that. It is this vast informal sector that has transformed today into the acute insecurity that we have on the continent, whether you are talking about maritime insecurity, piracy, oil bunkering, you are talking about drug trafficking from Latin America through the Gulf of Guinea into West Africa, from there to the Sahel, and then moving from the Sahel all the way to the Gulf of Aden, and then into Europe, and then other places. Those routes have been there historically. Today, they have been transformed into the most dangerous routes that we have for transnational organized crime. And the reverse route for terrorist networks, they follow the same routes, from it, whether from, Afghanistan, from, Iraq, through Syria, what happened in Libya, into the Sahel. Today the Sahel has become one of the most dangerous, places on earth. And then it is coming down. Today we have ISIS already in Libya. And then from Libya, if you remember, the Mali crisis, actually the spark was from the Libyan crisis. Today ISIS is there. It may not be long before ISIS morphs into what is happening in northern Nigeria, in Niger, and other places. So they keep reproducing themselves. This is one whole set of the sources of insecurity in, on the continent. And the only way to transform it is through governance. Through good governance, whether political, economic, social, cultural, and then also international governance. How do the powers of the world, businesses in the world, the whole illicit, world that we have today, how do they feed into that situation? That is the situation. And I will tell you, just a very basic story about this, related also to governance. And then we go to a country like Mali, where the moment the crisis, Gaddafi was removed from his country, and of course the powerful countries, NATO, spearheaded this time by France and the UK, when they eliminated Gaddafi. Good riddance. But the thing is, what was the exit strategy? There was no exit strategy. Let's remove them, and then we see what will happen. It happened in Iraq, and we are still, paying the cost of the chaos in Iraq. It has happened in Libya. We are paying the cost of the not thinking about, after Gaddafi, what next? And then you leave a security vacuum. Today, we are repeating the same thing in Syria. The so-called moderates, against Assad and other people. And in the Middle East, a moderate today can become extremist tomorrow. And then the extremists can become moderate tomorrow. It just depends upon, which color is winning at what time. So just recently, they were saying that ISIS has seized the latest weapons, many of them that the US actually sent into Iraq. How did they get hold of them? You know, it is because even those people who are supposed to be the moderates are actually sleeping cells within the so-called anti-ISIS, ISIS axis, within that country. So, if you don't have a critical analysis of this, how do you then control the weapons flow, the illicit weapons flow, or those that you have sent in order to remove a dictatorship or anything like that? This is what we have. That's the failure of global governance as far as politically and others is concerned. And then locally, we also feed into that. You see, I was part of a mission that went into Mali, to go and then find out how the region could help the president of Mali to counter the MNLA insurgency, in the country. When we went, what we found out on the ground was that the president himself was actually controlling a criminal racket in the north. Okay? And those networks were already fraternizing with MNLA elements in the north, around Gao, Kidal, and other places. So they were just there sleeping until their leaders, who were in Libya, fled with their weapons and everything back into the country to go and join them. And because they were fraternizing with the Malian army, they knew all the weaknesses of the Malian army, and then they knew how to, counter them. This was the information, that was, given to us. Added to that is the fact that we don't have the, map here. If you look at the map of Mali, Niger, Libya, Libya is, share a common border with Niger, but never with Mali. Okay? In Niger, they were able to disarm everybody fleeing from Libya into the country, including the son of Gaddafi, who were in Niger. But the MNLA elements were able to leave Libya, pass through Algeria, and then come into Mali. And the Algerians were saying that President Atete, told them not to disarm them. They went through a third country, from Libya to Algeria, to come into the country. Okay? So they were there. And then when we told him what could ECOWAS do at that time, he said, with the insecurity, acute insecurity in the north, the wisest thing to do is to, to declare state of emergency. This was a president whose term was coming to an end in a month's time. Okay, he had tried everything to cling on to power, he couldn't. So now he was trying to hide behind the insecurity in the north to declare state of emergency. So under those rules, the constitution is suspended, no elections and other things. And then he went further, that if I say we are going to declare state of emergency, they will say it's because I want to cling on to power. So ECOWAS has that regional authority, so if we advise the country, sensitize them, about the need for, that, it will become acceptable. Yeah, so he was going to use it for that. When we met the others, they said he had already planned to declare state of emergency, and that less than 2 weeks before he declares it, he's going to be overthrown. Or immediately after the declaration, he is going to be overthrown. And that is exactly what happened in the country. So that is the extent to which people can, cling on, to power. And then, so that is the governance side. So the second, actually, major source of insecurity is the governance architecture in Africa that is not fit for purpose in order to control, the governance challenges in Africa. These are the two. Because once you have a proper governance architecture, then it means it is possible to manage all the other, challenges, even including transnational organized crime, including the well-being of the population, including, creating the minimum, preconditions for people to be able to express themselves. But that is missing, and that is where the issue of unconstitutional changes of governance, of government, take currency. So this is how, I see unconstitutional changes of government. How? Because today, if you look at all the crises that we have, seen in Africa, none of them were sparked by non-political sparks. None. If you can just mention any one of them that actually occurred not because of political reasons, then it means that theory is wrong. There could be a lot of, if you look at the whole conflict dynamics, you've got the structural causes, you've got the, acceleratory factors, and you've got the triggers. Okay? The acceleratory factors, if you take the traffic lamp, that is the amber, it doesn't mean that even if, there are threats there already telling you that there could be danger, it doesn't necessarily translate into violence. It is how you manage it, how you transform the amber, either back to green, or you allow the amber to continue changing color until a trigger sets off conflict crisis in your, in the society. That is the red light. And anything can, cause that trigger. So almost all the countries, in Africa, we find ourselves in the amber zone. But it is how we relate with each other, we relate with nature, we relate with what is the structures in the country that determines whether we are moving back from, back from amber to green, or from green to, from amber to red. And those are the triggers. And most of the time, the triggers are very political. One of them is the president doesn't want to leave office. He has reached his 2 terms. He will find every reason either to amend the constitution, amend electoral codes, or engage in outright fraud or violence in order to, remain in power. That could be a trigger, and those are some of them. In Libya, it was very political. If you take the latest crisis, you take Lesotho. For example, Lesotho, it was a constitutional crisis caused by what? A coalition government that was shaky, that could not, could not hold. And the military wanted to step in, into the vacuum. Okay, South Africa has come in. The latest one we have seen is Burkina Faso. What happened there was to try to manipulate a malleable parliament, in order to remove term limits from the constitution, and the population, refused, triggering, what we saw in Burkina Faso. In the Gambia, dissidents wanted to go and remove Yahya Jammeh. Why? Because in the Gambia, Yahya Jammeh is a monarch. Okay, he says he's going to rule for 1 million years. That is what he has said. Gambia is a place where the government has made peaceful change impossible. You can't remove Yahya Jammeh through the ballot box, and things like that. So you make violent change inevitable, and this is what is happening. And all of them are political. Okay, so now. We are talking about regional norms. Having discovered all those things, whether you are talking about ECOWAS, whether you are talking about SADC, whether you are talking about the African Union, they have got minimum norms on governance in the country, on peace and security. You had the OA since 1963. It was actually propelled by the theory of non-interference. This country is independent, don't go there. Today, with the AU, since about 2000, 2002, it is non-indifference. That is the change, the transformation from OAU to AU, non-indifferent, meaning that your sovereignty and your independence and the non-interference in your affairs end where regional security begins. That is it. So nobody is there going to, look at you just like that. In ECOWAS, and then because of that, they have what they call the Charter on Elections, Democracy, and Governance as one of their normative documents. If you go to ECOWAS, there is the Supplementary Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance. It is actually, because on the continent today, we still rely on sovereignty of states. And it is not only in Africa. The UN Charter is also based on the sovereignty of states and not on, regional ideals and, that kind of thing. But the thing is that there is growing non-indifference and the whole idea of the right to protect, and other things in the world are gaining currency, so that is how you have to, interpret it, today. So this is the thing. So you cannot manipulate. The ECOWAS protocol says 6 months to election, nobody can change the constitution or change the electoral code. That is one of them. And some of the leaders have been so smart, like comparing Burkina Faso. He tried to change the constitution more than 6 months before elections, so that ECOWAS, it means you cannot come in. It's 6 months. That kind of thing. Others are not so lucky, but added to those norms, is the fact that in Africa, one thing we are specialists at is, just churning out documents, norms. These are the rules, these are the regulations, but nobody takes care of implementation. Nobody takes care of evaluation. And that is a major weakness in the African peace and security architecture. So you've got the norms, but when it happens, what happens? The AU, ECOWAS, SADC, IGAD, they should be the people who should be the arbiters. They are to call, the leaders to order, or even the other member states, the presidents, the prime minister who have signed up to these norms are obliged to call, their peers to order when they are doing it. But it has never happened. It never happens in Africa. Very rarely does it happen, because the heads of state have turned themselves into a trade union organization where they protect each other. So you look at it where a head of state is even messing up with his people or her people until things reach a very serious crisis point. Nobody talks about it. And even if you go there, they will tell you, who tells you that there is problem in my country? Because it is the same territorial integrity question that people project. So who has filled the gap? It is society, civil society, and others who do it. If you look at wherever the international organizations have been effective, it is because the conditions have been created by the pressure from below, from women's organizations, from trade unions organizations, from civil society, the elitist NGOs, and others who you call society. Those are the ones who have actually brought about transformational change in their countries by removing people who don't want to leave. You see, if they fail, wherever they fail, the heads of state will go, and then be expressing their fake sympathies to that leader who has avoided a coup or anything like that. But where it succeeds, they rush, then to make sure that the conflict does not spiral into something that can even threaten they themselves. So if you look at wherever society has been able to push dictator aside, the international community comes in. And then what do? The first thing they do is, we should have a transitional roadmap. 1 year. After that, there will be fresh elections. And where does that society go to? It is the same, they go back to the same square one, the crisis period. Why? Also because civil society itself is not a political entity. It's not an organized entity, so you can force people out, but there is a gap between your pushing that leader out and then what actually replaces that leader that you've removed. They have no control over it. And I think this is where we have to posit positive leadership within civil society, within others. How do you bridge that gap between removing a bad leader and creating the conditions for a better system of governance, which you have no control over? You see, and once again, I'm going to the basic example of Burkina Faso, where Compaoré was removed. This guy has been in power for about 30 years or more. He has been removed. But in that country, there has never been any other serious political alternative. So he is gone, but all the people who are going to vie for power are part of the Compaoré system. So whatever happens, you are going to have Compaorism in Burkina Faso without Compaoré. I mean, that's what's going to happen. So there hasn't been any change. In fact, Fumi and others just organized a very important workshop on peace building, and those were some of the conclusions that we came to. That is when you are talking about peace building, do you sit down till the society collapses, then you try to shore it up and then put it back? What usually happens is that all peace building initiatives actually move the country back to the immediate pre-conflict situation with the same antagonisms, with the same challenges, and so any little shock and then that society tumbles back into crisis. So the thing is, how do you break that vicious cycle? That is the purpose of rethinking peace building today. How do you do it? And I think that is the question we have to ask ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Musa. I should say that when I grow up, I want to speak like him. But my own suspicion is that with that statement that the presidents have formed a trade union, I think you should look for asylum for him. I don't think he will get back into Addis Ababa. But thank you very much, Musa, for the presentation. Of course, the discussion has it started on the leadership question, it moved on the governance question and its relationship to security and insecurity, spoke extensively about the shadow state and its implication for security, and obviously concluded by discussing the idea of regional norms, which, if I heard him very well, he basically implied that it's, the regional norms are driven by a sovereignty logic in a context where insecurity and conflict are crossing boundaries, and therefore there is a dilemma there that I think we have to handle. Let me not pretend that I can do justice to his rich presentation. I think, Musa, you will allow me to ask if there are any questions, any engagements, comments, and all that. I can see a hand over your head. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Musah, for this very interesting and very informative presentation. My name is Yaya. I'm one of the ALC fellows. My question is, you have been working with this African head of state in West Africa for many years, and now you are at the level of the African Union. What exactly have you seen in the attitude of these leaders that makes them to become so scared of leaving power? They want to. Why is it that they just don't want to leave? And how is it that they are forming themselves into a trade union in court, as you put it? I mean, because without it appears they are incapable of changing, and on the other hand, we haven't yet got the civil society that is ready to take them on. So, I mean, it's a huge challenge for leaders, African leaders of today, the young people that are coming up, to actually, navigate the system. So, particularly since it will be easier for them, the leaders. What have you seen in the leaders? What is their fear?
Can I take a few more and then we'll come back? Yes, please.
Simon Mundy of this parish. Some people will have heard me say this before, but nationalism was a very bad idea in the 15th century, and it's proved to be a very bad idea for both Europe and Africa almost ever since. Aren't we at the stage now where actually we have to admit that and say that the colonial borders drawn in the 1880s and the post-imperial settlement that followed in the 1960s and 70s is largely moribund, and that the only way to get your good governments is effectively to dismantle that sovereign level and start putting the societies back together along lines that are actually natural to those societies, rather than along boundaries invented in the 1880s in Berlin and later in the post-colonial era.
Okay. Yes, please.
Thank you for a very good presentation. My name is Kiane Yayana. Ex-fellow of the African Leadership Center. Your analysis, like many other analysis of leadership, is essentially leader-centric. And what I see is that, you seem to draw a vicious circle of leaders not clinging to power and not wanting to leave power. But my question, and somehow to some extent is a comment, is that these leaders actually emerge from society. So if leaders emerge from society, from the people, don't you think that it goes beyond the leaders? And so if it goes beyond leaders, what do we actually do about followership? How do we transform the followership such that these leaders that emerge from among the followership from society no longer behave the way they behave?
Okay, take one more. Yes.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Doctor. My name is Konjo Manash. I'm one of the fellows at the African Leadership Center as well. So my question is, I remember during your first opening statement, you were saying that there is a disparity, age disparity in terms of leadership when you compare African leaders in that of the West. And then when you see most African countries' constitution and their laws, there is an intention by the government, by policymakers, of not the youth taking part in decision-making process. For example, most constitutions say if you want to run for presidency, it's above that age, certain age. Why is that? I mean, is it an intentional motive, or what do you say on that specific?
Thank you very much. Let me come back to you and then we go back for one more.
Okay. Jara, why don't African leaders want to leave power? I think that was actually the reasons that I gave at the very beginning of my interaction with you guys. If you look at the history of Africa since independence, there are many factors that make leaders unwilling to leave power. One of them is the fact that either you are in power and you have everything, or you are out of power, you have nothing. In fact, it is in the last few years that you have living excess of state on the continent. Usually in the 70s and in the 80s, they kill you, or you end up in jail, after you are removed. So the thing is that if you are in power, you want to stay there till you die. At least you are entitled to your state barrier. Because if you leave power, you have nothing. That is the first reason. That we do not make what is the conditions possible for leaders not to fear after office life. That is one reason why people do want to cling on to power no matter what. The second, and that was, I think, what I said before, that in Africa, you know, you take a country like Nigeria, okay, where the oil industry accounts for about, you know, what is it? It is about
90-something%, 7%.
yeah, of it, and it is controlled by the government, 70-80%, and that is where the patronage comes from. Okay, so if just imagine having the opportunity to control, you know, that resource of influence, and you know that you want to let go of it, or you take even the poorer countries where the mineral resources, whether it is gold, whether it is diamond, most of them, it is the state with private companies and not indigenous private, you know, companies. And most of the time, those raw materials, whether it is cocoa, whether it is, you know, it constitutes the vast, you know, percentage of the GDP of the country. And it is controlled by government. Okay, it's usually controlled by government. And why is it so? Because in Africa, the state is indistinguishable from the government of the day. The state and the regime are, you know, in fact, they conflict. You know, that is, you do not have that independent space that can exert checks and balances on, you know, what is it, on the institutions of the state. The institutions of the state, in most cases, are controlled by the government. So it is only in a few countries today that you have, in the, you know, a real separation of power, where the parliament takes the executive, you know, on, whether you have the judiciary, which is very independent, you have a very independent, you know, civil society, and then you have institutions that check on the executive and actually bring them to book. You don't have them, you know, on the African continent, because the regime in power controls everything that you call the state. But the state should not be synonymous with whoever is managing the state on behalf of the people at any time. That's what we have in Africa. So which means the president in power is actually the one who controls the resources of that country. And through that, he can influence, he can bribe, he can buy, he can, you know, do anything with those resources, of course, on behalf of the population, but without the consent of the population. Okay, so this is it. So if you are in that very cozy environment, why do you have to leave power? Why would you want to leave power? I mean, you know, this is it. Kabila, you know, Kabila the son, you know, recently also wanted to get his parliament to, you know, say that the country should go to a national census before elections, when he's going into elections within a few months. And then with the size of DRC, to go for a census will take almost 3 years. And then the constitution also says without the consensus, there shouldn't be elections. Okay, so, you know, they are finding all, you know, different ways to stay, you know, in power. And that is it. You see, the old ones want to die in power. There are others who are, you know, too young also to contemplate being out of power. Kabila is one of them. You have got Forum Yasimbe in Togo. They are also struggling there in Togo as to what carrots they can give him so that at least they can insert term limits, you know, in the constitution in Togo. You know, so the whole, what is it, conflict management, political conflict management in South Africa is about negotiations. You know, about negotiations, how long I'm going to stay, or how many more years will you give me, then I can also see, you know, I mean, you know, you know, this way. This was happening in Africa, you know, throughout. You have very few countries where a president will never dream of actually fiddling with the constitution or even dreaming of staying in power, you know, beyond their term. You know, in places like maybe Cape Verde, and it is a very small country, you know, which is not representative of the trend, you know, on the continent. And I think there are a few other countries where those things are coming, like Botswana, like Ghana, You know, I think Senegal is also doing, you know, quite you know, a lot on, you know, that front. Maybe Kenya, you know, we just saw what happened in the elections, you know, the last time. So all is not lost. You see, there are already examples. You know, some time ago, you couldn't find ex-heads of state on the continent. You know, today there are a few of them left there. You know, it means things are changing gradually, you know, on the continent, but we need to, you know, sort of increase that. And that is why I'm saying that when we are talking about the leadership, it is not actually the president, the prime minister, but what can we do in order to create a critical mass, in order to shift from pressure, you know, from pressure, from opposition into transformation. If you remove a president, you see, and I'm coming to the next question. You were talking about the vicious, if they emerge from society. How do we, you know, do that? You see, there's a vicious cycle of leaders not willing to leave power. That is the next question, the third question that was asked. It is because when we go into, you see, when some of us were in university, you know, when you enter the university, you don't know when you are going to finish. You know, I mean, that, you know, that's all the thing, because political change was at that time engineered by students. We always started the demonstration, and the governments, in order to, you know, shut you up, they will just, you know, close down the university. So you go then, you know, you go into the secondary schools trying to agitate. You know, after, you know, some 1 year or something, you come back and, you know, begin from where you stopped. You know, so a 3-year bachelor's course can take you 5 years because of political activism. Okay, but what happened? Anytime we brought a president or a head of state to his knees, the vacuum was filled by the military. Because the student movement is not, you know, I mean, a force that can fill that gap. Or whether the workers' movement, the labor, you know, union, whatever you do, you leave it, you know, to the military to come and take over. Now, the military has been replaced by the club of heads of state. When there is a problem in Burkina Faso, they organize what they call the regional contact group of heads of state. You know, they will go there and they say that, listen, we are going to have elections in the next 1 year, you know, so everybody should be calm, another thing. You know, so what happens is the system is not transformed. It is the same system that produced that bad leader that is still going to midwife the next leader. Okay, so you are changing nothing. So all our efforts are there. That's why I say we have to break that gap from activism to transformation. You know, there is a gap there. If we do not change the system, then we'll keep producing the same result, because you cannot repeat, you know, doing the same thing, applying the same formula and expect to get a different result. You know, because it's the same system, nothing. You know, today, if the election takes place, the former foreign minister of Burkina Faso, Basole, who was with Compaoré, one of his, you know, if you, you know, have read about with Don Quixote, what is Sakopanza, that was it. You know, listen, he is creating a political party. He's going to be a candidate. There were other people who were in Compaoré's government, okay, who left him, not because they disagreed with remaining in power, and it was because they felt after Compaoré should be their turn, but Compaoré wanted his son Francois, you know, to be the next. So they protested. So they protested not because they were against the principles of Compaorism, but because they were not the direct beneficiaries. And then they are all going to be candidates in the next election. How do you get a different result? You know, it is the same mentality. So you need to transform the system, and that was also one of the conclusions, you know, that we are arriving at when we are talking about peace building. When the society has collapsed to that, you know, that period, do you rush into elections when you are going to produce the same results, or you should have a more reasonable transitional period in order to, at least change the system a bit, to make it more, feasible, to give birth to proper democracy, inclusiveness, and other before you go to elections. That is the question that we have to ask ourselves. If you remove somebody and you go with the same system, you are going to produce a different president, but with the same practice. That is what is going to happen. So that's the challenge today's leaders, that's including you, we have. Should we always be a protest movement, or we should be a transformation movement? I think that's the question we have to ask ourselves. And then we're talking about colonial borders. Yes, I couldn't agree with you more. When we are talking about the informal sector and the trade routes and what have you, they never knew any borders. Yeah, because people, in fact, for the majority of our traders on the continent, those, at times they use, a land route, they walked across border, they never knew, what they were. Borders are arbitrary. Borders are arbitrary where the, people of the same ethnicity, the same religion find themselves on either side of the border when they are the same people. And that is why the very pioneers of, Pan-Africanism talked about one continent. That has not materialized, but those ideals are, the ones actually animating, some of the regional organizations today about regional integration. The East African community is already thinking about, having one common space, trade space. ECOWAS, today there is a visa-free movement, in the countries and things like that. But the drive for integration is in tension with the whole notion of sovereignty and the territorial integrity of people. But when we talk about the two main, manifestations of the lack of security today, we are talking about transnational organized crime. The word trans, already tells you that form of crime doesn't know any borders. Boko Haram is in Niger, it is in Cameroon, it is in Nigeria. Al Qaeda, in the Maghreb, they are everywhere in the Sahel. Today ISIS, is talking about it is about Iraq and Syria. That they see, is their border. When they are talking about tax evasion, it's tax havens. Another thing, drug trafficking, it cuts across borders. So the response to them must also be transnational. You cannot resolve a problem in your micro state and feel that you are isolated from, the environment of violence and, others. And that is why the necessity is going to, if it is not idealistic, necessity will force us to think regional while we act locally. That is it, and that is the, method today, and that is, I think, the formula that we are going to. The threats are transnational, they are cross-border, and you cannot think that you can cocoon yourself in your micro state and then, shield yourself from the impacts of the, insecurity that is around the world. You have to be a part of the global effort to fight them. So this is it, and, I think that is what is driving the need for integration. When you take the African Union and they are talking about multinational joint task force against Boko Haram, they are talking about the UNOAFU process, talking about intelligence sharing across the border. They are talking about how do you fight money laundering, laundering. They are all cross-border transnational initiatives, because they are some of the instruments actually to combat what is happening all over the world. And today, with globalization also, the level of imitation, copycat, at least throughout the world, you cannot also, ignore it. The whole thing about Islamic State is a concept. Okay, if you look at the virtual map of the Islamic State, it starts from Spain, Italy, southern parts of Europe, all the way down to DRC area. That is, and then Asia. That is the virtual Islamic State or the Caliphate that they talk about. And it is not al-Baghdadi who is going to come into all those spaces and occupy. So today terrorism also has become like McDonald's, or that is it. It's like McDonald's, or it is like a Best Western Hotel. You see, if you go to every country, you have Best Western Hotel, but they are not managed by the same Best Western Hotel. That is original. There is it is a brand. You go, you buy into it, and then you use some basic standards of that benchmark in any country. So you own it locally, but you owe a spiritual alliance to the mother company. So if you have McDonald's all over the place, what you buy is the logo, the yellow, and then the recipe for their food, so that when you are eating McDonald's in London, it is the same. Started beheading people in public, they also started beheading people in public. So that's the recipe. And then they talk about one thing, we are going to do this, and then they repeat the same thing. Suicide bombers. In fact, a colleague of mine was telling me, Nigerians love life so much that nobody could imagine that somebody could could strap explosive around themselves to go and explode them, but it is happening today. So this is the thing. So it is a franchise that you do it, and that is the effect of globalization, the effect of the complete loss of control over ICT, information communication technology in the world. This is what is happening. So in Africa, in fact, if we want also to contact to do that, then we must try to conquer that ICT. Because today, if you look at ICT, it is not the most powerful country that control ICT. Yeah, India leapfrogged into equality with the powerful countries by its mastery of ICT. ICT is out there. Nobody controls it yet. Nobody can control it. If not, you can't get the Snowdens of this world, and others. It is the it is that place where we have to put access to. We cannot compete for nuclear power. We cannot compete for that, because that is already monopolized. And then the difficulty to get it, if you see what Iran is going through, that even to refine nuclear fuel and things like that. Those areas, the control over instruments of mass destruction, they are controlling them. But ICT is something like a free-for-all zone. And I think that is what Africa has to take advantage of, not for destructive purposes, but for transformational, activities on the continent. So it is also the upsides and the downsides of globalization. Yeah, and then the whole question of age limit. Look, I am not a proponent of age limits. In fact, it is a natural process, that actually occurs. In norms, constitutions, and other things are, daily practices that are codified into regulations for society. So it is up to, each society. When Ronald Reagan became president, he was was it in about his 80s or something, 70s and 80s, and it has all come down to you know, when Obama came, at what age? Because they do, you know, there is no, you know, age limit there. Even our heads of state, you know, who were, you know, who have been wheeled, you know, to go to the ballot boxes, they cannot talk. They say, look, it is my leg that is pinning me, not my brain. Yeah, so I can still rule. You know, meanwhile, they go there and they are actually vegetables, and it is other people who manage the racket on their behalf. You know, so this is what is happening, and I think it is up to it, the attitudes of the people. Me, I feel that there should be minimum conditions, not age. What I think is that in societies also, term limits, you know, do not occur anywhere. And in Africa, it is going to be very difficult to instill term limits universally. Because if you take a country like Ethiopia, or you take a country like Cape Verde, and then you take a country like Guinea-Bissau, where executive power lies with the parliament and the prime minister, and not the president, are you also going to impose term limits on political parties? You know, those are some of the critical questions that we have to, you know, ask ourselves. So it is up to each individual country. I think what one can do is to make sure that the constitutional provisions are not abused by incumbents, you know, for them to stay in power. You know, where you know, when there are no term limits, people lose power. You know, in many countries, and today, usually another indicator of the progress that Africa has made, despite the difficulties, is the fact that there are a few incumbents who have been removed mid-term, you know, through the ballot box. That it is possible, you know, to happen. This didn't happen before, you know. So those are at least some of the positive signs that we have to look at. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Can I take maybe another 3 questions, beginning with Olaf, Awino, and then Stefan?
From all what you say, and you speak of my heart, of basically everything what you say. Where is hope? You know, if I look at Joseph Kabila, okay, we know he was a taxi driver with some military training before he became president in another country, and he will probably never become taxi driver when he loses his presidential jobs, because this will cost him his life. Even if he starts today on a policy of good governance to get the Mo Ibrahim Prize, to have a good life after, because you know this would supply him with enough money to have a good life after. He would not lose everything. It would be on a Swiss bank account, and he could share a hotel in Geneva with Paul Biya. It would perfectly work. I said if he would today start on a policy of good governance to get the Mo Ibrahim Prize as soon as he gets out of power. Okay, you know, this is as fictional as you can expect it when I start. Where is hope? Was my question. So if I look, for example, at, you know, people are trying to do things. There's the African peace and security architecture. We have these regions, we have this idea, that we have this really revolutionary paper, the Charter of the African Union, which even gives the power to the states to decapitate a country which the leadership mistreats its own population. All this is there in prison. But what is the reality? If, for example, a member state president of another ECAS country than the DRC comes to Kabila and says, listen, Kabila, you should do some good governance, then who should that be? Should that be the president of Chad? Maybe? Well, he wouldn't trust. Should Paul Biya get there after 34 years of presidency? Sassou Nguesso? I mean, none of them has the right to criticize one of his fellow comrades. So where is the hope in any kind of African organization that people could draw from?
Okay, good.
Awino?
Thank you.
Thanks. I just wanted to bring you back to two quick questions, largely because of the composition of the room. You know, when you were explaining some of the reasons why political leaders hang on to power, I'm beginning to ask myself that are you suggesting an African exceptionalism? Because if you're talking about patronage, any of the heads of states or powerful nations can exercise patronage with the power, the instruments of power that they have.
Yeah.
So are we saying that there's something extremely exceptional about the African continent and African leaders that, you know, attracts them to patronage in such a deep way that they cannot, you know, step away from power?
Okay.
You know, this whole notion of living well, you know, and you know, all of a sudden you come in as well, our president, the Kenyan president, for instance, comes from a well-off family. You know, so what is it that will force him to stay in power because he has those trappings before? Is there a notion of African exceptionalism? I think not. But is this something that we want to continue articulating, you know, to the rest of the world?
Good.
You know, that Africa is unique in that way. The second point that I wanted to bring you back to is the question that Simon Mangi raised. We're arguing that post-imperial compact is not working. What are the implications for that? I mean, South Sudan can be argued to be a manifestation of a rejection of colonial borders. One can argue the Azawad and the movement for the creation of Azawad is a rejection of that. What would be the implications for the continent if we begin to rethink the notions of devising those borders?
Stephanie?
Yeah. Thank you so much. My name is Stephanie Minou. I'm a current ALC fellow. My question is going to be related to something that you mentioned earlier. But first I'm going to say something that we've been learning in our leadership class. It says that leadership is about influence. And to be able to influence, you need to have some kind of power. In your opinion, to what extent do you feel like the African Union actually has power to be able to implement this change that you're talking about? Or does the African Union actually has that power, knowing that the African Union is African states? That's what it is. So to what extent do you feel like, you know, it's able to doing that? And then my second question is, you're talking about change, and I believe that this process is something that's, I mean, it's going to be long, but it begins now. For future leaders to be able to get there, there needs to be, you know, like some kind of space for them as well, you know. So in your assigned position, with some of the ideas that you've mentioned now, you know, some of the things that I truly identify myself with, have you been able to exert some kind of influence at your level, knowing that you are not an African leader, you are not leading any state? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So that I'm not judged to be authoritarian and letting the African presidents. One more question? See, democracy at work.
Yes, exactly. It's okay. Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, where is hope? You know, I think you know, that is the you know, that is the first question. I think the hope is in the last few sentences that I pronounced before we went to the next round of questions. That you see, it is a series of small positive changes that produce a critical mass. That is my, you know, belief, and that norms emerge from, you know, practice. You see, and that the neighborhood factor is very important in, you know, spreading change. You know, because when something happens within a neighborhood, it can become a contagion. You know, I mean, you know, this is what you know, I understand. After the Second World War, the whole idea about Germany and the European Union idea was not because you know, they didn't want to sort of destroy Germany. They wanted Germany to be a very strong country, but anchored within the values of the EU, so that it could not produce what happened in World War I and World War II. You know, that was the concept of people. That is a Germany that is prosperous, but which is very much anchored within, EU. And today, EU has actually become, the exemplary leader. It is the one that sets the rules for European behavior. If you have followed what is happening with Greece and then the other countries and then, all that, even the crisis in Ukraine, and things like that. So this is it, that transformation. So the power of example is very great. If you take the West Africa region where I come from, if you take Compaore, who was just overthrown, he was, his army actually was like a mercenary army to Charles Taylor in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, and others. He was an arms merchant for, these groups in the Sahel, together with Yadema in Togo, and others during those, years. But Compaore now became the supreme mediator for Africa, eventually, and it is also about neighborhood influence. That if people behave in a certain way, you are forced also to, to move toward that. So when we are talking about change in historical terms, it is not a decade. It's not 2 decades. It's practice that builds over time. And the example that today a sitting head of state can be removed from power through the ballot box is a very positive development in Africa. For example, those are the the yardstick that I talk about. And then some time ago, it was like leaders wanted to maintain power or leave it for their progeny. Okay, so you had Kabila the father, Kabila the son. Who come there? You have Yadema the father, Yadema the son. Who come to power? That is giving way because people are, opposing it. Compaore tried it with Francois, his brother. It has not worked. Yeah, Gaddafi, wanted it. It has not worked. So people, say,
Mugabe might get there.
Yeah. Well, he may get it. I mean, if he doesn't fall again down the stairs. So that is a possibility. You see, but that is what is happening today. And so now, because leaders, and in fact in Niger, that is what happened when Tanja in 2011, when he fraudulently organized a referendum, to give himself 3 years. It was not because he wanted the 3 years. He wanted those 3 years as what you call a transition period for his son to attain the age of 40, which is the minimum age in the Niger constitution for you to be eligible to be a candidate. So he needed that period. And then, through coordinated action, he failed. So today they have gone back to themselves trying to, stay in power and not preparing the ground for their, sons, daughters, or anything like that. So they are changing, was it Chino Achebe or who, that if the hunter has learned to shoot without missing, I've also learned to fly without perching. That kind of thing. So it is a hide and seek that is going on, today with them. They are exhausting all the tricks that they have. And eventually it is going to end. And, those generations, whatever happened, Kabila, the elections date have been set. Is he going to refuse? In Burundi, there are no term limits. But you see, term limits or no term limits, we have a situation where legality clashes with legitimacy. That is what is happening. It can be all legal, but it may be illegitimate because people do not, you as the leader. And that is what is, and that is what is happening in, several instances. So we can say the glass is half full instead of half empty when you talk about transformation in Africa, because I can see very critical progress being made gradually. But that is why I say, that as civil society, as leaders in every corner where we are, we should not leave our activism. We should not, sort of put the threshold of our leadership wherever we are at the level of protest, and that we should shift it to the level, the threshold of transformation. How do you, do that? In fact, that is the gap that is left. In some society, they will call it pushing from protest to revolution. Okay, so that is where we are. And then how we are going to achieve that, it is there already, that people can say no to a sitting head of state. That is what is happening today. We have reversal somewhere. There are counter revolutions. It has occurred in Egypt. For example, we saw what happened there. Where the system, where the former president had been cleared of all his charges, the same system is back in power. So all the effort, all the death in the street, but it is something. Yeah, those are some of the reversals that you come across on the continent, but on the whole, the movement is positive. So there is hope. That is, I think what I can say about that. Is there something exceptional about Africa? No. Okay, I don't think there is anything exceptional about Africa. What is happening? I think what is happening in Africa is a function of, the normal nation building, state building, and all that. You see, if you do not go back into history, it is very, very difficult to sort of conceptualize what is happening today. In the world, the usual adjectives used for things that happen in Africa is barbarism. It is this, it is that, as if it is exceptional to Africa. The most barbaric, what are the happenings in the world actually happened in Europe. There hasn't been any, mass murder, genocide that surpasses what happened in the First World War and the Second World War. For example, and even in modern terms, what happened in the former Yugoslavia, what happened, in other places, at times they are even worse. But of course, today it is the power of the media, CNN and others, to portray reality in a certain way, to project a certain line of thought. So I feel that we are all part of the historical, transformation of the world, and it depends upon which stage, we are. When I was talking about ICT, conquering ICT, I was talking about it, because if we are to follow the normal trajectory of development, then it means it will take probably another 100, 200 years for Africa to, start thinking about, ICT, conquering it or anything like that. There are areas where you can make quantum leaps. There are areas that you cannot avoid. Latin America, just a few years ago, was ruled by the same set of brutal dictators. Whether you're talking about Argentina, whether you're talking about Brazil, and other places. Asia was like that. South Korea, it was only a few years ago that in South Korea, protesters with catapults were being gunned down, with dictators, and then that sort of thing. So I don't think. And if you talk about even Europe itself, when did Spain escape from military dictatorship? Just in the 70s, and then things like that. So it's relative. It's relative. I don't think we are exceptional. People might think, yes, no, Africa, nothing can change. I I'm an optimist, an eternal, optimist, and I know that things are going to change, and that what is happening in Africa is not unique, at all to Africa. That is my belief. And then.
Can I just? I'm so sorry.
Yes, please.
May I just add?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
That in Africa there's a sense to which there is volume.
Yeah.
The volume of what is going on, I think is drawn largely by the lack of, systems.
Yeah. Exactly.
Such that, the same parliamentarians can get away with so much on the continent, for example, but in the UK, the system, once discovered, the system does not necessarily allow parliamentarians or anyone in a position of authority to get away easily, right down to what you spend, taxpayers' money. Until every now and again you realize that actually across the world people are just, politicians or anyone is just as corrupt as the next person. But in Nigeria, I don't think anyone, or in Africa or in any country, Nigeria comes to mind a lot because of the extent to which power holders go. So no one would hold you accountable for spending $5 of taxpayers' money on pornography because you watched, there was a case in the UK a couple of years back. This parliamentarian's wife had, in the hotel they stayed, I believe, ordered a pornographic video which cost like £5. And there was so much uproar. I cannot remember whether he retained his, whether he resigned or not. But those systems that make this possible are the very things that I think we're saying are not yet present in any, nothing has been institutionalized on the continent of Africa to allow us to do things like that. So there's a sense in which social media, but there's a sense in which there's a high volume of this, and then it now looks like there's African exceptionalism, which in actual fact there's not. But the volume of it, my goodness, it's something that has become really apparent.
Good. Yeah, thank you very much, Fumi. I think that is, in addition to that, and earlier when we were talking about, systems, systems that produce the same results. And then there is the need to transform the system. We're talking about revolution. I think putting across, that these are the, what is happening. We are not exceptional. We are part of the, the whole, process, that is ongoing. And, you are going to have hiccups. You are going to have, changes. But what we have to ensure is that the overall trajectory is positive and transformational. You are going to get reverses, nothing, happens very, smoothly in our, dialectical, world. So I think that, there is a lot of hope in that. And then the rejection of colonial, borders. You see, this colonial, border thing, I don't think it is just like, listen, we refuse that this is not our territory. The thing is that, look, the other time, we were traveling from, where was it? We were traveling actually from, I think, Geneva, going to Berlin for a meeting. Okay, these are two different countries, and we were reading in the paper, and then when even you arrive, you see it physically. We had read it in the press before, where a citizen of I think Belgium actually sued the the European Commission, took them to court, saying that Europe, they felt that Europe was one country, but he didn't understand why. When they read the border between, Belgium and, Germany, the train actually slowed down a bit. So it made that citizen feel that he was moving from one country to the other. So there shouldn't be that change at all. So, it's sort of, clears up that dilemma. The thing is that if you take the EU countries today, the only borders that they police are the perimeters of the country. Once you enter the country, even though they have got the Schengen group and then what have you, generally it's the same. When you are in the country, you move, even from the outside, nobody actually, checks you. Once you enter you cross the perimeter, the fence of EU. This is what we want people to feel. It doesn't matter whether you are from, South Sudan or Sudan. The thing is that it should be possible for you to move freely, across, trade freely, settle freely, anywhere, on the continent. And eventually, that feeling of you belonging to a different country, you lose it. You lose it. That is actually the situation. Today, more and more people are seeing themselves more as Europeans rather than Belgians or French or something like that. But there are some other nationalists who want to remain where they are. For example, this country is a very reluctant member of the EU, with the feelings of people. Even though I think if you look at the people, themselves, ordinary people, but the policy makers, membership or none of EU, is becoming an electoral issue in the UK. Whether they should go for a referendum, whether they should not go for a referendum, and things like that. But for many people, it is about, being in Europe, and they're giving it a certain, civilizational, sort of description. So today, when Ukraine is in crisis, probably not, just because of anything, but because of this same xenophobia and other things. People say it's a clash between Russia and Europe. So Russia is no more Europe. That is the situation. So it is a different connotation, altogether, wherever, you go today. So I don't think that, those arbitrary borders should be any impediment, to regional integration. The thing is that they can be there. In 1963, that was the non-issue that actually led to, stupid differences that the OAU stayed for all those years without moving the continent forward. When they said, listen, the idea of the Pan-Africanists around 1958, 59, 60, 63 is that those countries that were independent by 1963 should already constitute one country. And then any country that subsequently gained independence will immediately join. And so you expand into one space. And then the question, some of these says also, then who will be the president? Yeah, because so it means this guy who is proposing that is because he wants to be president of Africa. So we have to oppose him. Yeah, very stupid. This thing, as if that person, even if he or she becomes president, is going to live for 200 years. So that is the issue. So you throw the baby with the bathwater. Because of very stupid questions and then, the differences. So I feel that, let the borders be there. They are also going to be relics of colonialism, and then, things like that. Because what colonialism did was actually to, to sort of violently stop state formation in Africa. That was it. If you look at the history of Africa, you had empires that were building, up another thing. These were stopped, and then, the Berlin, treaty, another thing, and what it did. You are not just going to reverse it today because, unfortunately, many Africans, we see ourselves today as first French, English, Portuguese, before we see ourselves as Africans. That is the problem. Lusophone, Anglophone, and you know what and what, very few Afrophones. You know, I mean, so yeah, so those are, you know, so it's a mentality, and once we are not able to liberate ourselves, you know, of that mentality, it's going to be very difficult to translate it into our everyday life. You know, I mean, you know, that is the problem, and I think the more we inculcate that idea, the greater the chance of the borders just being imaginary. And then we're taking ourselves as a one continental, you know, unit. Yeah, leadership is about influence. Can AU do anything? No. You know, I think it's going to be very difficult. It is about intergovernmental organization, just like the United Nations. The United Nations can only act where the strategic, you know, the lower the strategic interest involved. That's what is happening, and that is what the AU is also about. You see, Russia has got a strategic interest in eastern Ukraine. You know, it is because Russia feels that the gentleman's agreement that you know, Russia made with the West about the non-expansion of NATO to the borders of the former Soviet Union was broken, and now Crimea, which has always been the Black Sea, being the base of the fleet, the Russian fleet, since, you know, time immemorial, you know, all of a sudden is, you know, it is NATO's, you know, fleet that may be there. You know, he's not going to, you know, sort of agree to that. The word that there are many, you know, interpretations about what, you know, what is happening there. But you know, I think this is the, you know, situation that UN has to come in, because it is about the same issue of territorial integrity. That today we are changing the post-Cold War order. But you see, it's not the first time the post-Cold War World War order is being changed. You know, the borders of Yugoslavia were changed. Kosovo, you know, is today more or less also an independent country under the bayonet of NATO. You know, and then things like that. You know, so Eastern Ukraine or Crimea is not the first. You know, it is that today it is media propaganda, you know, and then others, and then the UN is going to be helpless as long as you have the veto powers of the, you know, of the P5, because Russia can veto any, you know, Security Council resolution pertaining to Ukraine or Crimea. So you are blocked because the UN is an intergovernmental agency. You know, I mean, that is it. But everybody knows that it's controlled by the P5. You know, and then each one of them can block any move. The same thing with the African Union. African Union also has got its A5. There are some powerful countries whose decisions the Commission, you know, takes, you know, into practice in many of the, you know, conflict that we have on the continent. I mean, you know, this is it. It's about strategic interests and what have you. But the other thing is that, okay, if you take ECOWAS, which I know better, ECOWAS has declared an intention that they want to move from an ECOWAS of states to an ECOWAS of peoples. And because of that, the ECOWAS Commission should be supranational, which means decisions that are taken override, you know, the decisions of the individual member states. It has not completely translated into action, but it is, you know, something like something that is going to happen eventually, as long as the convergence, you know, of thought and of ideas, of the drive toward democracy, democratic culture, you know, the more you build, you know, the more you are going to move towards that supranationality that we are talking about, that the European Union is today going over it, where the decisions of the court overrides national law, you know, on many things about the European integration and things like that. We are getting there gradually. And then the other thing by default is also the fact that even the decisions that some of our illiterate heads of state come and sign, norms, they don't even understand them. They are all written by the ECOWAS Commission, the Secretariat. So the Secretariat, even though it's a bureaucracy, they have a lot of power to influence because they craft the laws. They do everything and they do. So it is about how you infiltrate them, how you make them, make sure, these heads of state, they come and sign, these documents will become binding on them. And I think that is the problem with domestication of laws, because they come there, under the glare of, camera, they sign documents, they don't even know what they are signing. So this is the thing, because it is the technocrats who do them. This is the issue. So you can use that. And then I think that brings me to the last question. So the AU can have an influence indirectly, through that. And it is also, when you have a critical mass of, a particular leadership on the African continent, they can also lead the others, actually to change course. It is all about influence, it's all about the power of conviction, within this. So that is the other thing that I will talk about. And then what have I been able to influence? Yeah. I don't know. I think it is, probably it means we have to follow, because I'm not the one going to talk about some of the things that we've done, in the past, and then what we continue to do. But I will, probably refer people to what happened in Guinea-Bissau, what happened in Niger, under Tanja, and I think if you delve into it, you get to know, some of the things that happened at that time. It was during the Niger crisis, that for the first time in the, history of African diplomacy and intergovernmental organization, that's why I'm saying the influence of, say, the AU Commission or the Secretariat, that the Commission is able to issue a statement saying that the region does not recognize the legitimacy of a certain president, even though he's still in power. It was unheard of in, so you just find out how that came about, and things like that. And that led from one thing to the other until Tanja himself, lost his power. You see, so, those are the things.
I think this is probably just a case of modesty, because I think you play a personal role in that process. You probably want to explain to the class, because I think, in fact, you've been all over the radio, and the way the government, reacted to that itself and saw you as an individual who was shaping, and you probably want to respond to that incident as well.
Yeah. Well, probably those are some of the things. And I think, you see, and so I would like to conclude, by also telling you one of the attributes of a transformational leadership. It is your preparedness for self-sacrifice. Which is very critical in this case. If you ask the people who knew, I was forcibly removed from the directorship of political affairs in Lagos, thinking they were going to hide me somewhere. It didn't work, anyway. So the thing is, when you are doing it, is it that, are you thinking about your pocket? The fact that you shouldn't lose your job or anything like that. I think the moment your action is controlled by those considerations, you are incapable of transformational leadership. That is very, very, very important, and I should be able to sacrifice. And Fumi will tell you that since I began my, conscious career working, I've actually not been anywhere for more than 4 years or 5 years. You know, I mean, that is the case of, you know, places even less. You know, you go there because you become too radical for that system. You know, either you are pushed out or you jump. You know, so, yeah. So that,
obviously, thank you. Obviously, it's obvious that Dr. Musah is suffering from an acute case of modesty. And so we will leave it to Fumi at one point to explain what his role was in this ECOWAS process. Nevertheless, let me take this opportunity, Musah, to thank you very, very much for taking time out of your schedule. When we saw Musah at the Wilton Park, because we had a meeting since Monday, myself and Fumi congratulated ourselves, partly because that constitutes a coup. I mean, in its every sense. And we understand how busy your schedule is. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you very much for being here, especially for the colleagues and fellows on the program who have not had a chance to interact with you before. I think that this has been a wonderful opportunity. For me, make sure that we get him many more times so that he can come and share with us some of these experiences and ideas. Thank you very much.
So thank you.